My mother was dying. It's always a sad day when your mother is dying. And I loved my mother very dearly. In fact, she was a wonderful woman in many ways. You know, I was just telling a brother the other day that one of the last times I went to visit her, when I got to the door of the ward, I heard her praying. It's just 2 days before she died. I didn't enter in to that room, but after a while there were 2 men came out. And when I went in, she said, "Did you hear me praying?" I said, "I did." She said, "Those 2 deacons, or elders, whatever they were church officers, they came to visit me. And she said they didn't offer to pray with me, so I said, I'll pray with you before you go." Great woman. My mother was a wonderful person. But you know, God gave me a great privilege of holding her hand when she was going over the boundary line. The other friends that lived near her, they hadn't that privilege. I came 7,000 miles. Brother Maxwell knows I left the tent behind and came. And God gave me the wonderful privilege of holding her hand when she was going into eternity. And I remember I knelt down and my mother kissed me. Do you know, I feel that kiss today as if it were yesterday. I wiped away her last tear. I held it in my handkerchief. It was like a jam. You know her last words? She said, "Harold, I'm resting on the precious blood of Christ. There's nothing better." God has given me a great privilege, not only of being a preacher, a little measure, but he gave me a great door of opportunity to visit. I have visited hundreds of people in the city of Toronto. It's a city of 2 3/4 million souls. The hospital at North York, I'm better known than any physician. People of all creeds and races, when they're dying, send for me to come. I was sent once to go to the hospital to visit a dying Roman Catholic. His name was Jablonski Havelock. He came from Czechoslovakia. He was a barman at the Greenwood racetrack, and he had never heard the story of the cross as to redeeming grace. He was dying with terminal cancer. He said to his common-law wife, "Although the Father has been in and has given me the rights," he said, "I'm afraid to die." A little niece was in there one day, and he said to her, "I'm afraid to die." She said, "I know people that say that you can get to heaven." That little girl was brought up in the Sunday school, and she rang her Sunday school teacher and said her uncle was dying. He wanted a minister. That woman rang me, and I went down there, found the man. I went 21 times. You have to go early in the morning because of the traffic condition, so it meant rising early and going down, parking and going in. And I went in there and held his hand, got to know him. And every time I was there, I quoted John 3:16. "For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." I didn't preach to him any theology. One verse. I taught him it. He quoted it in broken English. We got to like each other. He looked forward to me coming. He was sinking fast. And this day when I came in, the light of heaven was in his face. And he said, "Harold, I believe that Jesus died for me at cross." The next time I went in, I noticed at the bottom of the bed it was changed to Evangelical. He said the father was in to see me, young fellow, And I told him, I'm waiting on the old father coming. Rather have him. Rather have him. You know, that dear man, he was a testimony for the few days or weeks, I forget how long it was, until he went home. You know what I did with that man? I taught him to pray. Never prayed in his life, only counted his beats and so on. And I got him to pray like Brother Jack Gamble. Not to Jesus, but to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. My, if you'd heard him pray, and utter that, it brought the tears to a stone. Many a time I stood and wept. His wife, or his common-law wife, rang me. She said, Jablonski died. And he made it clear that all the funeral arrangements were in your hand. There no priest there. I said to Mr. Norman Crawford, I said, Norman, I want you to help me on a job I've got to do. We're going down to central Toronto to a large funeral home. There'll be no Christians. There'll be all Czechoslovakians. The whole community of Czechoslovakians will be there. I remember the day they buried Toronto in a little hillside cemetery. Mr. Crawford said, Harold, if it was only for that man you came to Canada, it was well worthwhile. The whole community was there, and we preached the gospel. And I remember what he did. He went over to that little niece, and he said, you know, there was a man in the Bible once. He got to the place of cleansing through the little maid. And he said to her, have you ever got to the place of cleansing? The little maid never got saved. Little maid in Naaman's house was a believer. That little maid never was saved. But that man got saved. And he never heard of baptism. He never saw an assembly. He never knew anything about the King's glory. But he was saved through John 3:16. He'll learn all the truth by and by. He has seen the King in his beauty. I spent many happy years with many godly men in this country. Brother Mr. Wallace, first time we did go to preach, he said to me, Harold, can you divide 60 by 2? That's the time you have. It's a hard school. One night at Zion Mills in the tent, I overstayed my leave by 10 minutes. We used to hang our watches on the front pole. He came up the tent and he said, Harold, you might as well hang her in the bushes. But they were great men. I learned a lot from our dear brother. Now with the Lord, he wept when I was going to Canada. Mr. Campbell, he would never have spoken like that. He was another type, takes all types. He's a great man. The day that I drove him to McCoskman for the last time, he was 91 years of age. The old home was gone. He stood sadly looking over the landscape. He said, we'll go down to the cemetery. We found the grave of his father and mother, and his 5 brothers, and their 5 wives. And the old gentleman stood there and he said, Harold, I pointed them all to Christ before I ever stood in a gospel platform. I tell you, I hung my head in shame. He was a soul winner. And he finished his course with joy. I revere the memory of Mr. Bailey. Visited his widow since I came home already. The last words he ever said to me were these, Harold, live as though Christ died yesterday, rose again today, and is coming tomorrow. A great man. Mr. Albert Joyce was a great man. Is that right, brother? Many a happy day I spent with him. And with Mr. Oliver Smith, Mr. William Wark, so many. I've labored with over 30 brethren in my lifetime, both young and old. I never had a row with any of them. I could kiss them all when the day was done. Didn't always agree. I learned to swallow my spittle. Mr. Campbell told me once about an assembly that was almost divided over a chicken. Yes. This chicken seemed to come over the wall and eat the woman's flowers and pick on her vegetables. Terrible row over a chicken. He said, Harold, what would you have done about it? I said I would have killed the chicken and made soup. Didn't amount to a hill of beans. You know, we're so paltry. There are things that are vital, but there's other little things that amount to nothing. I was going into a meeting years ago, and it was a ministry meeting at 4 o'clock, and it was in Ireland. I'll not tell you what assembly. And the leading brother said to me, my wife won't be here, and my mother-in-law won't be here. I said, are they sick? No, they wouldn't listen to you. Well, I said, I wish you'd waited till after. Time to tell a fellow that. I said, what is wrong? You passed them by on Royal Avenue with your nose in the air. I was thinking about the tabernacle lately. Never saw them. Every time ever after, I even stopped my car one day and blew the horn at them. Saw people. People are very, very easily offended. Very easily offended. This brother, I met him, and I heard he was putting in the dagger behind my back a few places. You know, you never talk against people, but it gets back. So I shook hands with him, and he said, how are you doing? I said, fine. And I said to him, you know, brother, I can look you in the eyeball, and I can say to you what you can't say to me. He said, what? I said, I never spoke a word against you in my life. He swallowed 3 times. When I went to preach, I didn't know the difference between the great white throne judgment and the judgment seat of Christ. And one night I preached, if you die tonight, you will be at the great white throne before tomorrow morning. When I went to the door, there were 2 brethren waiting. Their faces were like hangmen. I was on the carpet. Yes. And just as the moment arrived for correction, a girl came forward and she said, tears were in her eyes. She said, could I speak to you a moment? I said, yes. What's it about? She said, I want to be saved. Why? Because I don't want to be at the great white throne before the morning. Yes. I don't believe that should be preached now, but God used it. God uses simple people and simple preaching. And don't preach that, of course. You've got to know the difference now. Better taught. But the Lord uses His Word. And that meeting never came off. I never had that meeting with those men. And by the time she came out and went away, they were gone home to their wives. They were away in bed sleeping. And I went down the road, happy. Happy. Another soul forgiven by the grace of God. You know, when I was first saved, I never thought of heaven. You never spoke about it. Why? Because I felt it's a long way ahead. I'm only 20. 21. They're all wondering why so young a man should preach. I was at a conference once and they all preached about young men going out to preach. And Mr. Campbell said to me, there's a remedy for your disease. There's none for mine. He wouldn't do that. You never get Mr. Campbell doing that. Preaching against people. Dear brother, never go on the platform to preach against anybody. That's a terrible thing to do. To get up and preach at some brother you fell out with or some preacher you didn't get on with. Don't do that. That's nasty. You're a bad boy. Do that. Do you know what I long for now? Heaven. Heaven. And the King. To see the King. Most of my life is behind me. Most of my service is over, and the least of it lies before. And then at the end we'll see the King someday. And the King kissed Barzillai, the kiss of reward. Deeds of merit as we thought them, he will tell us were but sin. Little acts we had forgotten, he will tell us were for him. May we all get the kiss of the King for his name's sake.